Thank you all for being here. I will give you just a little bit of my background if you haven't met me before and heard a little bit about that. I was an ER doctor for 14 years before going back and doing a fellowship in anti-aging and regenerative medicine, which is the same fellowship Dr. Carl did. We really don't love that name. We wish it was optimal aging because that's more what it's about. And it really is that more functional medicine approach where you're looking for the cause of symptoms to treat those instead of just covering up symptoms with a prescription medication. We still very much believe in the importance of pharmaceuticals when they are medically necessary, but we like to try to address things through lifestyle when we can. And so that has been a great transition for me, going from the emergency department where everything is reactive to this type of wellness medicine where we try to be more proactive, kind of a 180 for me. The consequences of not getting enough sleep can be immediate, like having a car accident, or more long-term, like increasing your risk for diabetes and heart disease. And so when we look at sleep deprivation, there are kind of a couple of different categories of where sleep is important, and it's in our brain function and emotional well-being. So when we're sleeping, this is when our brain is processing what we've learned for the day, so super important, especially for children, but also processing our memories, which is important for all of us. So if we're not getting enough sleep, we're going to have a hard time retaining information and remembering things. Also, while we're sleeping, this is when we make our neurotransmitters, things like serotonin, which you've probably heard of because that's associated with happiness and joy. So our mood is very dependent on sleep. And anybody that's ever been sleep deprived, especially if you've ever been a new parent, you will see how quickly that sleep deprivation starts to affect mood and things start to really unravel. Another interesting thing that happens while we sleep with our brain, and this is a little more detailed science, is this is when we make something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which they did not even know about when I was in med school 25 years ago. We used to think that when there was injury to neurons, that was it. It was done. But we've learned really in the last decade or two that with this brain-derived neurotrophic factor and some other brain-derived factors that we can have neurogenesis, or healing or growth of neurons, whether that's in the brain or peripherally. And there's really tons of research going on around that because we don't really know how to capture that per se. We're learning more and more about what supports that brain-derived neurotropic factor, but one thing we know that helps with it is sleep. And so a few other things that there is evidence that they support is melatonin, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later when we get to treating insomnia. Adaptogens, which I will also talk about, but those are things that help with cortisol levels. Exercise helps improve this BDNF, and also vitamin D, interestingly. So, as far as physical health goes, I think this is where maybe we don't always, as lay people, know as much about the benefits of sleep, but sleep deprivation is linked to high blood pressure, to heart disease, to diabetes, and to increased risk of stroke. Also, and this is another thing that's been a big deal in the last couple of decades in science, we're really seeing that while we sleep, our immune system really is boosted through this. And we know that melatonin has a direct effect on our immune system, positive effect. But sleep itself also supports the immune system. So people that are sleep deprived are going to have more viral infections. But also sleep supporting the immune system is helping our body fight cancer cells. So that's another important piece of it. The other interesting thing that you may have been seeing things about more in the media is sleep deprivation and obesity, that the two are linked. So it's interesting, one of the studies is on children, and when we see the uptick in obesity in children, it correlates with a decrease in the amount of sleep that children are getting. per night in the US. So we see this correlation with a decreased amount of sleep in kids and an increase in obesity. And there are many different thoughts on why obesity and sleep are linked. Some of them are kind of really obvious. The longer you're sleeping is less time awake to eat. Also, when we get plenty of rest, then we have enough energy to actually exercise. And then there are other more complex things that have to do with hormone balance and sleep. So while we're sleeping, we're also getting a balance of our hormones. While we're sleeping, we're making human growth hormone, which isn't just for growth, but also for repair of cells. So it's definitely super important in children, but it is important throughout life to make human growth hormone. We also get some balance of our cortisol, and then also of some adipose hormones, which are things that we actually measure in our blood work, but leptin, adiponectin, and ghrelin. So those things that help control appetite and inflammation are all getting balanced while we're sleeping. So without sleep, you can have an increase in appetite as well. So, and insulin is also with getting plenty of sleep, we actually improve our insulin resistance. So we respond better to insulin if we're getting the proper amount of sleep. So super important things. Then there's also just safety. So most of us know that if you're super sleep deprived, it's not safe to drive, that you could have more accidents at work. But it is interesting in studies when they just have people get 1 hour less a night, and people say they feel fine with that a lot of times. And then they test them driving cars, they have drastic decrease in their driving ability, even though they are adamant that they feel fine. So a lot of times we don't have great insight to our own sleep deprivation, which gets me to how much sleep do we need? So we really do need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. There's a subset of people genetically, maybe like 3% of people that can function on 6 hours pretty well. But in contrast to that, there's a subset of people, another about 3%, that need 9 hours of sleep. So most of us are in that 7 to 8 hour window though, and we're usually kidding ourselves if we are kind of assuming that we're one of those 6 hour or less people. So why don't we get enough sleep? And part of this, I think, there's the insomnia piece, but there's also just the cultural piece. And as a culture, we don't prioritize sleep, despite those 11,000 plus studies on sleep deprivation. It's a badge of honor, the less sleep that you get. We overschedule ourselves and our children. So we really have an issue as a culture with not taking this seriously, which with our chronic health epidemic, I think we need to really wake up. And I'm sure the reason all of you are here is because you are taking it seriously. So that's great. Stress itself can interfere with sleep as far as insomnia. It can cause problems with falling asleep, but also with problems with early waking that I'll talk about a little bit more. Anxiety and depression, of course, can cause sleep problems. A lot of times we think of hypersomnia or sleeping too much as a symptom of depression, but not sleeping enough can also be a symptom of depression. And sometimes it's the chicken or the egg. Is it just the insomnia that's leading to the mood, like I talked about before with the neurotransmitters, or is it the depression that's leading to the insomnia? Endurance athletes, so people that are running marathons, doing long distance bike riding, do need to be monitored for their cortisol levels being okay, because they can have spikes in cortisol that interfere with their sleep. They can also have deficiencies in micronutrients that interfere with their neurotransmitters and how that affects sleep. So if you are an endurance athlete, that can put you at risk for insomnia. Obviously, electronics are a problem with causing us a lack of sleep, whether that's television or all the devices that we have. Hormones are another piece of where we can get into trouble with sleep. Medications can have side effects that interfere with sleep. Another important thing, if you are having problems with fatigue during the day, is to be evaluated for sleep apnea, because that's a common reason for fatigue. The more common, I would say, is just not getting enough sleep. So